Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 1444. Let's review what we learned yesterday. I did a little research as well. Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 1444. That was just a repeat. Okay. So I did a little research on what we learned, being that it's a relatively new topic for most of us, and it was pretty brief. I wanted to see what how it was discussed more at length in other places. So I'll share my findings and give you the sources as well. I think it's critical here to step back a moment and just give more of an overview, because, as I said, this is a very advanced material, assuming a lot of things that we know already. The Rebbe Rashab is not beginning from scratch here. So there are a lot of things that need to be spelled out. So I want to spell it out a bit more. I've done it already, but I think it deserves another take, maybe more details. Let's go back to the big picture here. The big picture is that the purpose of existence, why God created the world, is to make a home. This is nesav. This is the ultimate reason. That's the actual language used in Samach Vav. Tachlis hakavana. There are other reasons given, but the ultimate reason is nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's why it's nesava. It doesn't have a logical, rational reason. It's a taiva, and as the Alter Rebbe says, a taiva nishtak in kasha. You can't ask a question a taiva, which simply means the taiva is higher than questions, because the concept of questions and answers, logic and rationale, haven't been created yet. That's exactly what God desires. Tachtenim means tachtenim as they exist now. So you can basically say God desired a world that would make sense. But you can't say the desire is according to that logic, because that logic was created by the desire. Just an additional emphasis on that. Okay. Now, how is that done? How is that done? Remember, since it's dir b'tachtenim, so the intention is not that God should create it, that it just should happen in the world of tachtenim, meaning in the language of Chassidus, and the Rebbe emphasized begidrei tachtenim, in the parameters of tachtenim, meaning according to the rules of God that God established in existence. In other words, we're not doing anything here that is suspending nature, or things that are miraculous, or things that only God can do. It has to be done in the gedrei tachtenim, and that's why mitzvahs have to be done naturally, not with a miracle, as it's known. And it has to be done by tachtenim, meaning by entities that exist in tachtenim. So who can ultimately make a dir b'tachtenim? Animals and vegetation and mineral, meaning chayit, shemeach, and daimim, and are part of tachtenim. They don't have the free will, and they don't have the capacity to transform themselves. They have the capacity to fulfill. They're the clockwork. If you want, they're the program that God uses to run existence. That's the laws of nature, whether it's in the animal world or in the the vegetable world, semeach, or the world of the mineral world. So it's in the min ha'odam. And when you look in the story in the Torah, it's very clear. 6 days God created existence. Every day its own creations. Oir, rakia, ultimately all the fish and the birds, all the vegetation, rather, I should start with. Mineral was already created earlier. And then vegetation, then animals, fish, birds. And ultimately, on the 6th day, the first Rosh Hashanah, the purpose is now the Adam arrives, male and female. The human being is the one that is blessed with, on one hand, made of material of tachtenim, of this earth. On the other hand, Vayipar Ba'apav Nishmas Chaim has a special soul that no other creature has. The Vayipach, B'teichiyusei u'mepnimiyusei, as he says in Tanya, from Zohar, coming from the inners. In other words, the human being has something of divine power to transform this tachtenim that was created. But at the same time, there's also a guf. It says, Vayikach Hashem l'kim es ha'ofer min ha'adama. God took the earth took the dust from the earth, or a clump of earth, and from that he shaped the body. And vayipach ba'apav, in this body, in the nostrils, he breathed in the divine spirit, the divine soul. Neshama, neshima, that's why soul and breath go hand in hand. Same word, different pronunciation. So now a combination of neshama and guf. And if you look, actually, Rashi brings that the guf of Adam was taken from all over the earth. It wasn't just one section, because the human being is charged with the responsibility to transform the earth, or in broader terms, to transform tachtenim. So now you have the players in place. You have tachtenim as the creation. You have the human being with a divine soul is the agent of the divine agent that has free will, because not a puppet, not a robot, that will come and struggle and work hard, la'avdo l'shamra, as the expression is in Bereshis, to serve and protect and cultivate this garden and turn it even to a greater garden, as we learned earlier in volume 3, if you recall, the Garden of Eden on its own. And we create taste viseris, we create much more additional energy and much more drawing down much more of the divine to the point of even new and unprecedented energy into existence. That's the general pieces. Now, because it is tachtenim, which means it's concealed, as the words of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, chapter 36. Tachtenim means not in space, meaning it's not the lowest as in the lowest level, it's the lowest as in the most concealed. So in the most concealed of the divine, and in addition, the human is given free will, which is only possible because divine is concealed. Or, as we know, where does this concealment originate from? The tzimtzum. Because of that, there's a possibility, also there's a risk involved. There's a possibility that the human being should not fulfill his purpose. So when Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, they have transgressed, and they defied and betrayed their calling and themselves. And that creates even more concealment. And the subsequent sins and transgressions basically create more disconnect. The purpose was to go into tachtenim and align it and elevate it and refine it toward what God's plan is. But if it goes the other direction, it makes it more difficult and more concealed. And then hence is everything that follows, the generations that follow, all impacted till this day by that Chet Eitz Hadas, which was made possible because of the concealment. And as a result of that, we have what we call the avodah that we have is not just to contend with what Adam and Chava had to contend with in the beginning, but now we have to deal also with all the concealments and all the transgressions that have happened over the thousands of years, which led to all kinds of destruction and injustice and war and violence and bloodshed of the worst type, of the less worst type, of all types. And at the end of the process comes Mashiach and Geula, when we create, when we repair and we align existence back to the way it was meant to be. And now with much more work that we did, because we also corrected the power of tshuva, of transforming the negative and the dark, so it's even a greater light and energy, that will bring us back not just to the way Gan Eden was in the beginning of creation, but far, far new, unprecedented ways. So Mashiach and Geula is a whole new reality. Throughout history, we've had tastes of it, like Matan Torah, the Alter Rebbe says, was me'ain, was a taste of what would be in Mashiach's times. And different times that we have experiences that give us a little taste of what it will be like when everything is realigned. Now, as a result of going back to the tzimtzum and the chet, this is very important as well, and that's something I've discussed many times, but I'll say it again, that if there was no concealment, there's no possibility for free will and no possibility for transgression. Because if the divine is revealed, like Eirei Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, there's no other option. It's a seamless divine consciousness, period. It's only because of the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is necessary to create tachtenim, to create an independent consciousness. But because of that, the concealment could also be misunderstood, like the father that hides from his child in order to elicit his ingenuity, his avodah. And instead, the child gives up looking because the father concealed himself so well. So that concealment has the potential, and indeed does devolve when we misunderstand it and misuse it, abuse it basically. And that's every transgression is essentially a displacement and making us more distant. So when we speak about golus, for example, every golus is more exile, more concealment. It all originates from the Tzimtzum Harishon. But throughout Ishtalshlus, all these Tzimtzumim are necessary to create lower worlds all the way to Tachtenim. And there again, in each case, every parsa, every partition, every concealment can go both ways. It's either understood like a concealment in order to bring it down the teacher to the next level of the student, or if it's misunderstood, it can turn into something goes the wrong way. Okay. Now let's talk a few minutes about Klippa, and we'll talk about Tohu, and then we'll talk about, we'll get back to what we're learning here. You'll soon see its relevance to the whole picture here. Now, the Tzimtzum, as I said, creates a situation where now there's an independent consciousness. Ultimately, will be Tachten. Because of that independent consciousness, you're going to have a tension now. Lifnei Tzimtzum, there's no tension. There's only one reality, one seamless reality. Yes, there are subtle dimensions of God choosing first pre-Ratzon, before he envisions existence or desires existence, and then before he envisions it, and then envisions it and allocates Shir Asmei B'Keach. But it's still all one seamless reality. It's all under the so-called, it's all under the one umbrella of divine consciousness. It's the Tzimtzum that creates a dissonance. So initially, the dissonance doesn't sound really terrible. It's Eris and Kalim ultimately. The Rishimu is the root of the containers. That's rooted in God's Koyach HaGvul, power to limit himself or power to conceal himself. The Eris are rooted in the Kav, which in turn is rooted in Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, as we've learned. So you have Eir and Keli that will ultimately evolve into, it'll take stages. In Ak, you don't have the emergence of Kalim. In Akudim, it's 10 energies in one container. Then in Tohu, in the Kudim, it'll be 10 energies in 10 containers. We'll talk about that momentarily. And then in Tikkun, Natzilus, it'll be the alignment of the 10 energies in the 10 containers. So right now we have so-called two tracks. They all originate, Lifnei Tzimtzum, all the way up, as we've learned, Hayahu Shmei Bolvad, God's power, Yechelis, to reveal, and his capacity, Yechelis, not to reveal. There, it's all divine. But as they evolve into tracks, they become Eris and Kalim. And the example I often give is like the development of a fetus. So it begins before the conception is just a concept. God decides that he will bless this couple with a child, meaning he will send a neshama into a body that they will develop. How they will conceive, I should say, to conceive through the seed, fertilizing the egg. Conception, one cell will then split into 2, into 4, into 8, and there you have the Eris and Kalim in the human microcosm, how it develops in our personal lives. And then 9 months later, a child, a healthy child, is a perfect alignment of the Eris and the Kalim, the faculties and the limbs and the organs. Right. Every form, God forbid, of disease or illness is a disalignment. So you have in microcosm what we have, the Elam Katan Zeh Adam, the whole Sheder Shtalshlus also takes place within us. Okay, now let's talk about Tohu. So Tohu is a world which, in a way, I like to call it a market correction. Tohu is a world where the Eris and the Kalim clash. Being that it's not Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, meaning it's not the seamlessness of divine consciousness pre-Tzimtzum. So even though the Eris and Kalim are both divine instruments, you can say, divine channels, but at some point, because there is an independence in the Kalim, which does not yet really manifest, so there is a tension between them. So in Tohu, you have the Eris Merubim, the Eris are too intense, and the Kalim are too fragile. That in turn creates and results in a Shviras HaKalim. We'll call that a Shviras HaKalim is a shattering of the containers. Okay. So that's like the example of let's say, when there's enough dissonance and enough tension, there'll be some shattering, there'll be some wake-up call, if you wish. Because there's an imbalance going on. It's still a divine imbalance because there's nothing evil going on, there's no sin there, but it's an imbalance. That imbalance is actually there firstly to declare that we have to do something about it. You know, imagine a person is growing up in their lives and they have real dysfunctionality inside them, whatever it may be, a very unhealthy childhood. They have a lot of anger, they have a lot of insecurity. And they go along, they're able to function. They're functioning. They're really functioning. Well, suddenly they get married or they have to deal with a relationship and things don't work out so well. When emotional things start coming up, they may be functioning in their job and in their survival, but when it comes to deeper things, you suddenly realize there's something going on. Now, when does a person go for help? When it's unbearable, when it becomes clear there's a real problem. So imagine you never knew there was a problem. The person, God forbid, can live their entire lives with real problems within, psychological, emotional, and never address it. But if there's a shattering, which means a wake-up call that says something's wrong, suddenly you feel extreme anxious, extreme anxiety, extreme depression, or other things are falling apart in the person's life, they get addicted. I'm just using very practical psychological examples. So on one hand, it's terrible, of course. But on the other hand, it's a symptom that there's a problem. Tohu is a type of spiritual dysfunctionality that indicates there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And we need tikkun. We need help. So tikkun comes. So tohu is actually, it's called seser almanas livnes. It's like raising a building with a Z, breaking down a building in order to build a better building, in order to repair it. So you say, why do you have to break the first building? Because the first building is faulty. And if you just leave it be, it's not going to last. So tohu is essentially like a market correction, like a reality check that is claimed that is saying we need something here to bring these eris and kalim in a completely synchronized way. And that's tikkun and atzilus, where the eris become more tamed, eris mu'atim, more commensurate to fit into the container. So you have a healthy structure instead of one that is unhealthy, that is unbalanced, we'll call it. So in a way, tohu, if you wish, is the root of all dissonance. The truth is the root of all dissonance is the tzimtzum, but the tzimtzum is still only a force of concealment. You haven't yet had developed a reality. A developed structure begins in ak and then akudim, and then we said tohu. So this Shviras HaKelim is what Kabbalah and Chassidus calls the root of what's called the klippas now, the klippa. So what happens in the Shviras HaKelim? Two things happen. The energy is nostalgic. It's like anything. When there's a breakdown, let's say in the human body, God forbid, so the energy, meaning the energy coming from the soul, gets removed. So for example, if a person, God forbid, has an injury on their arm, what's going to happen? The energy that was going into the arm can't flow. The blood can't flow, the energy, the nerves. And then there's the physical damage, which is the body itself that needs repair. So in truth is you need both. Now the was not damaged, it was just removed. It's like in any case, when there's an injury or disease, so the energy gets weak. It's like when a person feels weak. That doesn't mean the soul doesn't have power, but the energy has receded back, so-called, into its source. So the repair of tohu is really a complex process, but that's what we call tikkun olam. When we do the tikkun in this world, because ultimately the result of the shattered containers, we'll talk about tikkun in a moment. The result of the shattered containers end up being the think of it, the particles and the shards that scatter all over existence. Now in Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, not Atzilus, because Atzilus, even though Atzilus does come after tohu and draws from tohu, but Atzilus is an aligned world. Bri, Yitzir, Asiya are not that aligned. So that's where the different aspects, the scattering of the containers that were shattered in tohu, end up in Bria and then devolve further into Yitzira and ultimately in Asiya. So in putting it in our terms, when you look around all of existence, everything that's allocated to you in your life, the food you eat, the drink you drink, the sleep, the work you do, the place you travel to, basically all daimim tzemeach chai is coming from tohu. Now, the energy within daimim tzemeach chai is divine energy because there's a spark in everything. Lo yalechem levadi yichya adam. A person doesn't survive on bread alone. It's on the spark of the divine. But the spark of the divine has to be placed somewhere, and it's placed in a world where it can go both directions. That's called klippas nega. As I said before, the two options: either the concealment, and we won't understand the purpose of these sparks. Let's say in technology, and you use the technology for nefarious purposes, or for neutral purposes, or for nonsense, Or you understand that the sparks, the divine sparks in technology, though in tohu, they got separated from the kalim, and the kalim are like are scattered all over. Like the example I often give: take a book and tear up pages, and it's scattered all over. So the concealment can cause that we just indulge, or we understand that the purpose is that everything in existence is really meant to be aligned with the God's purpose. And then we start collecting and gathering all these shards that were allocated to us in our lives, and we're aligning it to divine purpose. And by doing that, we're being misaken. Where do we have the power to do that? From the neshama that comes from the world of tikkun. We'll talk about that momentarily as well. The guf, on the other hand, the physical body, is coming from the same place where all physicality comes, which is tohu and the breaking of the containers, shviras hakelim. Now we'll soon talk about the yesh and so on. I'll get there, but right now, to understand the physical universe, so it's true you need only atzmus, only God can create yesh ma'ayin, but the ability for existence to be fragmented and to conceal is not just due to the tzimtzum, it's the tzimtzum also manifesting in ways where the kalim are very dominant, and we don't always see the within it, and that's why we need the human being, as I said before. Then there's the human being, which is made of neshama and guf, to take the guf and align it to the neshama. So the power we get to do this is from tikkun. But what needs to be done is refine and elevate, and we could say birur, which also means to separate and to clarify, and to create unity within the division, within the diversity and the divisiveness and the dissonance of existence. So what I just explained was some of the dynamics of how that takes place, and that's why it's called klippa. A klippa, as I explained yesterday, is like a double-edged, as like a dual purpose. On one hand, a klippa is there only to protect the fruit within. In the words of the Shalach, klippa shemer lepri. That's when everything is fine. That's the way it was in Gan Eden before they sinned. All the klippas of this world were all aligned with their purpose. But as soon as they ate from the tree of knowledge, which itself is a klippa, and they ate it for the wrong purpose, what happened is now the klippa is like worshiping the shell and forgetting there's a fruit inside. Worshipping materialism and forgetting that its entire purpose is spirituality and divine. And that's where the klippa becomes a negative. So initially, the klippa is only there like a keli to the oir. As we discussed earlier, that's part of God's process, eris and kelim. But it has to be aligned. When a person, for example, thinks their life is more about making money and power and personal pleasure, they're basically forgetting the fruit within and living a life according to the outer containers. That's called a superficial life, living on a material level, and not revealing the purpose of it all, which is the divine within it all. That's what it means when we elevate a klippa. Now, klippas nega, shalosh klippas atmeis, we're not discussing here. Those are the things that are off limits, and the only way you refine them is by avoiding them. It's not relevant to our direct discussion. I'm just mentioning it for the record. So here we have the whole picture. So in truth, everything originates obviously from Atzmus. The Eibishter created all of this. But Atzmus wanted, as I said, tachtenim. Tachtenim, the way they're created right now, is a structure that makes sense. So the Eibishter created this eloquent and this fascinating design, not just the design of the universe, the design of how everything will evolve. The energies will carry God's message. The energies will ultimately manifest in the neshama that comes into this world, that rooted in oir. We're talking about the neshama as a gili. The neshama, using Torah and using all its assets and all its resources, has to now manifest within a body and transform the body and the animal soul. The body and the animal soul, where do they originate from? They also originate, obviously, from God's power. But how does it manifest in let's call the engineering of the cosmic order? That's the kav called kelim, ultimately tohu, which creates that dissonance, which manifests the dissonance. And then ultimately coming down into this world, and then the process from the bottom up, our avodah is to realign the kelim with the oiros. That's in personal terms, it's aligning your soul and your body. So the soul is carrying is the chelik elikama mal mamish. Ner Hashem ish masodam. It's like a flame. The body is like the wick. The body and the purpose is to refine the body and the animal soul. Now, a few additional points. We know the mere fact to create a body like that is so capable of feeling separate from the divine, that itself comes from Atzmus. But to put in different terms, Chassidus speaks on a lower level that the Nefesh Habamis actually has a root that's higher than the Nefesh Elokis. Nefesh Elokis, it's talking about in the cosmic order, is rooted in Tikkun, in Atzilus. And Nefesh Habamis is rooted in Tohu. So in these Maimorim that speak about some of the ideas that the Rebbe Rashab here is quoting briefly, it talks about this. Why, for example, a human being who's superior to Daim Tzemeach Chai, why are we dependent on eating mineral, vegetable, animal to sustain ourselves? We're higher than they are. The answer is because we're higher in Giluyim, in Atzilus, but they're rooted because they fell lower, and they are more. The divine is more concealed in them than in the neshama, in the nefesh Elokis. So the animal soul is rooted, and everything that's animalistic, meaning everything in Daim Tzemeach Chai, is rooted in Tohu. On a deeper level, is that the guf is rooted in Mitzusi Matzmusi of the Yesh HaMiti, and the neshama is rooted in Erein Sof, in the Gilui of Elikus. So when you add that into the equation now, when it comes down to Tachtenim, the bottom line is, yes, the body has, and the Nefesh Habamis have tremendous power, but it's completely concealed. It's like saying that Tzimtzum, the power to conceal is deeper than the power to reveal, but it's still concealed. And the goal, the kavanah is it should be revealed. And who reveals it is the neshama. So just to say, okay, my body is created by the etzem, that's not enough, because we see how easily we are seduced by the temptations of the world, that the body is seduced. Where's the etzem and all the things everything that our body and animal soul that's not appropriate? Because the etzem is concealed, it's completely embedded on an atzmistic level. It takes the avodas ha'adam of Torah, Tefillah, Gemilas Chasadim, mitzvahs, is to refine the soul, refining the body to the point that the body begins to acclimate itself and align itself with the oiris of Elikus. Then ultimately, L'asad Love, the body will rise and will reveal the etzem that was in it all the time, like we've been speaking earlier in the previous pages, just to fulfill the picture. Now to bring this back to where we are right now, let's now go back to what we've learned. And that is, he's asking the question, since neshamas are rooted higher than malachim, all the way in the etzem, l'sachad beguf de malka, through mitzvahs and through kshma, like we learned in the previous page. So, why do they have to receive aviyira from the angels? Like we do kedushas yetzer that we say before Krishma, when the malachim are far lower level. So as an answer he gave earlier, and he's going to repeat soon. We didn't learn it yesterday. I stopped right before that. But then he brings this whole sugya that I just elaborated on is to explain the piece that we learned on the first half of page 1444. So what does he say? That the gufim gashmim, where are they rooted? We're not talking about the mitzir simatzmuse of the Yesh HaNivra and the Yesh HaMiti. Where are the gufim gashmim rooted? Neiga vasiya. Because you couldn't have a body that has, so to speak, all the indulgences and the taivas that the body and say the body and the animal soul have, if the divine was revealed. So it's coming from noiga, like I said, klipas noiga vasiya, which in turn receives from the merkava of pnei aryeh, pnei nesher, and pnei shoyer of the merkava, which is, yesterday someone asked whether that's the malachim. He says yes, those are malachim. The merkava is malachim. It says it explicitly in other places. Here he also said it, but I confirm that it's really, that is exactly, the merkava is not just a inanimate chariot. Merkava literally means a chariot, a vehicle. It's not just an automobile or a wagon. It consists of malachim of different sorts that carry, so to speak, the Adam Elyon that's carried by the chariot. So the gufim and the nefesh habamis are rooted in the klipa of neiga of neiga dasiya, which in turn it receives from the merkava. As he explained, the three levels of the merkava is all in the animal soul. The midas sheba adam, that's the nefesh habamis. So the different midas, the different emotions are reflected, are basically the different faces of the three. We're not talking about adam yet, the pnei adam. Okay, so a person has different emotions. Ela shem klulim ba'aruchin is the nefesh hamaskelas. Okay, because at the end of the day, so here they need to explain further. So what is the purpose of this? If the animal soul and the body are rooted in the kelim that were broken from shviras hakelim, how does the merkava come into play? Because remember, everything has to be a hishtalshelus. It doesn't just fall from tohu into olam hazeh. It goes from tohu into tikkun, then into bria, into yitzira and asiya, for two reasons. First of all, there's an orderly progression. Just like the tzimtzum doesn't just jump from tzimtzum to tachtenim, to elam asiya gashmi v'achumri. There's the levels. The kav goes through all the levels to create existence and entire hierarchy. So the same is true on all levels. It has to go through a ishtalshelus. The ishtalshelus firstly explains, like we've talked many times, God doesn't need ishtalshelus. The ishtalshelus to explain the orderly progression, how it actually evolves one level to the next. And secondly, and maybe above all, in order for us to have a way to retrace the steps. So someone will say, how do I come? My body and animal soul are very powerful. They tempt me. I'm full with temptations, indulgences, all the things of this world, all our desires, all our pleasures. What do you do with all of that? So obviously there's the neshama's role, nefesh halikis, but we're talking about from the nefesh habamis. So the nefesh habamis is told, the person is told, listen, you don't have to leap back to tohu all the way back to the highest levels. What you have to do is align yourself, the animal soul, to the pnei sher, and to the pnei nesher, and to the pnei aryeh in the merkava. And we know the merkava is a kedusha, but it evolved from there into noiga of asiya. And so what you have to align is the animal soul. So the animal soul on its own, as I discussed yesterday, we have to find ways to convince the animal soul to understand the value of using its midas, not for self-indulgence, but for higher purpose, for the divine. But in the process, what you're really doing is also saying the animal soul didn't come from nowhere. We didn't create that Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara, an animal soul you were born with. That means it's rooted in higher spiritual levels. It evolved to a point where the animal soul can be completely self-indulgent, like he speaks in Tanya. That's a Russia. But animal soul could also be tamed. Animal soul could also be suppressed, like he speaks about the Beinani. And furthermore, you could transform the animal soul. That love of Hashem, also the animal soul should experience. But it's not a miracle, because the animal soul actually is a divine creation that just came through a lot of concealments. So now understanding that the animal soul evolves for, so to speak, the spiritual animals, and the spiritual cattle, and the spiritual eagle in the merkava. So that's the goal, is to align these two, which is ultimately how he explains why we need Yetzer and Malachim, because the Malachim are that level. So the Malachim are helping us align. In other words, it helps understand that the animal soul can, if you do your work below in Iskafia and Isapcha, of control, self-control, and all the other things, the animal soul essentially has also resources that are embedded within it that are coming from the merkava. In a sense, it's like softens the animal soul to be able to receive these higher levels. And that's why we need to have, and that's what he says, from its root in the merkava. But to do that, obviously needs the work of the person below to not let the animal soul out of control. If the animal soul is controlling you and you're just following all its desires, obviously you're not going to be able to elevate it. So the malachim that we say in Yetzer before Shema is helping us in that work by saying you can align the animal soul to its source and root in, to be mamshich from the malachim of Asiya, that to be mashpia, avaviyira, that you're being mashpia into the animal soul. And he used the example of Eish. That's the Eish, Shalmayla Shrimshchal Nefesh Habamis. To explain, the animal soul is very passionate. That passion is fire. That fire can go in the wrong direction, passions for the wrong desires and pleasures. But it can also be directed toward passion towards things that are kedusha. For example, when a person, even shalei lishma, for ulterior motives, very passionate about something that is helping other people, whatever the reason is, they're directing that eish from, instead of going to l'umazed, going toward kedusha. So he says the eilut mamshechal nefesh habamis, and because the animal soul is blocking and not allowing the divine soul to be active, you need something to speak to it. So of course it's the avodah we do, but we have in addition the siyua, the help and support of the animal soul source. Think of it like a child that's gone wild at school, and nobody can tame the child. So obviously you have to do whatever you can to tame the child, but if you can bring its parents or someone that the child loves and cares about, to so-called the child sees and maybe will respond a bit, it helps the child, it helps discipline the child. So essentially invoking Yetzer and the Malachim and the merkava is like bringing the so-called the mother of the animal soul in the spiritual worlds to help subdue it, to help tame it. Now let's just speak about Pnei Adam, and then I shall stop I know I did a lot of overview here, but I thought it's necessary. So remember, there's a fourth face of the merkava, but that's the root of the nefesh alakis. Sheidish nefesh adam b'chinas Pnei Adam sheb merkava. So in the Maimarim it speaks about it, that is the Tselem Elikim that ultimately evolves in the merkava. That's the nefesh alakis. The other three faces is the root of the nefesh habamis. But like he said, but they're all combined because all four faces are really all within the image of man. If you look at the translation, I think Yitzchak posted it, you'll see. Like he says, Arba Osan, Pnei Odom la Arba Osan. It's really the image of the ox or the bull or the eagle and the lion are within the image of a human. Because it's not just pure animal, it's also, like he said, Nefesh HaMaskeles. It's essentially the animal within the human, so to speak. That's why that image. So that's the nefesh habamis that the nefesh halikis manifests in. So the Pnei Adam is Pnei Adam. Okay, and that explains the power of, and that's the chen eitze yuutza ma'anshe knesset gdela, and this is the great piece of advice. The eitze yuutza. What did the Knesset Gdela advise and implement to say the two blessings of Kedushas HaMalachim, the two blessings before Shema, to remind and to invoke and draw the power of the neshamas that creates Hazazah Pnimis B'nefesh Habamis. Like I said, even though the animal soul can be a wild animal, but sometimes you see an animal that's very wild, and suddenly you bring its mother, it gets quieter. So basically, it's reminding the Nefesh Habam is weakening its resistance and so be Hazaza Primis, which creates Achkikim Befnim, because that's the root of the Nefesh Habam. He says in Tanya, when he speaks about the animal soul and the Yetzer Hara, he says these were also designated by God. It says, Sotnu Pnina l'shem shemayim niskav. Pnina was a harlot, was sent to seduce. The same thing with the Satan, is to seduce and tempt us. But in the Zohar, he explains, the Mashal Azena in the Zohar, that it's only the king sending a temptation in order to bring out the best, and that the son of the king should not be seduced. Like we spoke before about concealment. The purpose of the concealment is not concealment, it's in order for illicit our ingenuity to reveal that which lies behind the concealment. So in truth is the Nefesh Habamis was sent just like the Chet Eitz Hadas, the Eitz Hadas and the Nochash. They were sent to tempt Adam Achava. Unfortunately, they transgressed. They did not. They failed at the test. So nefesh habamis really is coming from a high place, like he says here. It's ultimately from the merkava, but it is a concealer and it is an attempter, and as a result, we have to overcome that. So by saying Yetzer before Shema, we're drawing these malachim to give that power to create azaz primis, a shift, an internal shift, like almost a shake-up to the animal soul, and causes a chikik b'fnim and chiseling or engraving within, like something like when you shake someone up and you touch them in their deepest place. And then Krishma now, the nefesh alikis could then dedicate itself to connect l'shtaba begufa de malka, which is the source of the nefesh alikis from gufa de malka, like we learned earlier. So even though the neshama is rooted in these highest levels, but when it comes down below, it is, I would call it, held hostage, but it definitely has to contend with and deal with all these concealments and the animal soul and the body. So as a result, we need strength to deal with that physicality or that part of it, which is coming from the animal soul and the body. And that's why we say the Yetzer before Shema. Now, if you want to know some of what I took some of what I said here, or I not really took it, I say based on it, it's basically in Eira Teira Shavuos, page 183, 84, 183 and 184. 185 maybe. Okay. So I know I took the whole class just to do this overview, but I just thought it's very valuable to be able to do it in order to understand the larger context of what we're learning here. I would like to learn till the end of the paragraph. Let me do that, and then I'll stop for any questions. So, but this is one reason why we say Yetzer. But there's another reason that we learned earlier. If you remember, we learned that the malachim are bnei mayim. They're the gut. They're the digestive process. Like the digestive process in the body, the malachim also serve another role, a role rather, to process and distribute divine energy into each part of the structure. And that's why he called before, that's why it says, Homu me'ai, that my innards ache, rachem arachmenu, on haben yakeli Ephraim. When the neshama comes down below, so you need to have rachmanis on it, and the rachmanis comes through me'ai. Why me'ai? Why do we need me'ai? Because rachmanis itself, Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, we learned earlier, are Ein Sof. They're like an Atzilus or higher than Atzilus. And to come down below, we need Rachimim that comes into Kalim and ultimately into Malchus and coming down below. And who does that? That's the Malachim. So that's the next piece. The Gam, he says, Ba'aveda nefesh l'kis Messiah Malachim. So one thing is to weaken, so to speak, and to soften the animal soul. Another is to help the actual divine soul as well. So another reason we say Yetzer, we talk about the Malachim, Messiah Malachim, Commission is Barliel bin Homu Me'ai. We learned earlier about Homo Me'ai, that my innards ache to it and causing it to have Rachma Rachmenu, compassion. V'hainu, what does that mean? B'neshama mislabeshes b'nefesh habamis. With the soul as it manifests in the animal soul, the neshama, the divine soul, as it manifests in the animal soul, shemisalim oira, and there it gets concealed. The light of the soul, neshama, gets concealed. So tzricha siyua ma'malachim. It needs support from the malachim to help stimulate the ava v'yira. It's ava v'yira. And this too is the purpose and function of birchis yetzer that the Anshe Knesset Agdela designated before Shema, Commission is bar le'il. So the Rebbe Rasha began with another explanation, but he's now going back to what we learned earlier is another way of explaining why you need birchis yetzer. So basically, the birchis yetzer of the malachim do two things. It helps soften and stimulate the animal soul to respond to a love and reverence of the divine. And it also helps the divine soul, because the malachim, their ava, like we learned, malach machal is chesed, malach gavriel is yira, or gvura, that they help actually also the divine soul, like you explained earlier, like the eye needs an external light in order to see, because without it would be dark. So the neshama is taka a high level, but the neshama comes down into a body where it gets concealed. So basically, Yetzer both attacks, so to speak, the animal soul and also supports the divine soul. Those are the two reasons. And now I shall stop. I know it's already 10:30, but since I did all the talking, now it's your turn if you'd like to ask it.
Why is he talking about Malachim the Asir? Talking Gabriel, Michael, they are all Malachim the Brio.
Because he's talking here about the neshama coming down Lamato all the way at the end of the day, all the malachim are nishtalshel. He's not mentioning Michael Gabriel here. He's mentioning the merkava. He's speaking the merkava that's the root of the nefesh habamis, and that is the merkava in Asiya. He makes it quite clear. Malachim da Asiya. Now the malachim of Asiya are rooted in the malachim of Yetzirah, and Yetzirah in Bria. But he's not really addressing that. I addressed it in the context just to understand the whole ishtalshlus. When he spoke about helping the nefesh alekis, there he did mention Michal and Gavriel, because they're talking about the nefesh alekis. But when we talk about the root of the nefesh habamis in the merkava, it's the malach in the merkava of Asiya. That's why he's saying it, because he's talking about nefesh habamis in this world, in Asiya.
About nefesh that this is.
What's that? There are too many people speaking. I can't hear.
Merkava, can you explain more? He said it softens it. I don't understand what that means.
How many people are speaking here? 1 second. I can't hear anything.
Sri is in Shoal. He's got a lot of background noise. He's in Shoal in California.
Okay, who's speaking? Svi or Shlem?
You got to go somewhere else. There's too much background noise.
Did you hear what he asked? I didn't hear what he asked. Did anyone hear what he asked?
He's asking us about the merkava, but I'm not exactly sure.
Okay. Shlomi, you wanted to follow up with something?
No, I want to know that he said v'gam ba'avodah the nefesh alakis mesayin malachim. So you said in avodah the nefesh alakis is not malachim the asir, but a higher level.
He doesn't say that here. I said earlier, if you go back to the Homo Me'alai, where he spoke about, I'll share with you where that is. That was back on, let's see here, on page 1427. So there he said, Ashpol mate adei malachim, k'may machne mechol ba'ava, shu mokel l'kol malachim shel chesed ba'ava l'mayla. Well, derech zeh b'ispael sayira, memachne Gavriel. He said that on page 1427. So if you bring that here, you could say, secondly, who said that Michal and Gavriel are exclusive in Bria? Who says they're not Nasiya as well? That's another point I would make. Bottom line is, he says clearly here, Malachim of Asiya. That's not a question. Whether that also refers to the Siyur to Nefesh Alekis, why not? Malachim of Asiya, maybe also Malachim of Yetzirah and Bria. Look, when you say if the three levels of Malachim is Serafim, Chayes, Veifanim, HaKedesh. Serafim is in Bria, Chayes HaKedesh is in Yetzirah, and Eifanim is in Asiya. I should have realized that right in the beginning. So really, in Brichas Yetzirah, we're speaking about all Malachim, all three levels. So that's really the bigger picture to really round it out. So I would say the Siyur Malachim is from all the levels, for sure, because that's what Brichas Yetzirah is talking about. Okay?
What's the mind of the neshama, even though the sherish is so high, but the bottom line is that misalem oiro when she's coming down.
Yeah, do you need proof for that? Even with the help of malachim, is it easy to get the neshama to be alive with avos Hashem, yiras Hashem? Yoda inish benafshi. It's not so easy. So as high as the neshama is, the fact is, it's definitely affected by the concealment. I don't think we need a proof for that. Just look at our lives.
Thank you.
And yet, that's why we daven. A proper davening is you're helping to the neshama, giving it support. Just like the eye, we learned earlier, the power of the eye, vision doesn't need light, even at night. But the eye that comes, the vision that comes into the physical eye does need light. So neshama, as it comes down below, would be like saying, since the neshama is rooted in the essence, why do we need Torah? Why do we need mitzvahs? Why do we need anything? But we do, because it does come down We're going to learn about this a lot more soon, but we already learned it. The neshama comes down in a very concealed way. Let's never forget that. Any other questions?
Yeah, how come? What does it mean? The merkava softens the impact of the animals. I don't.
I don't hear the question. What does it mean? What?
You mentioned that the merkava, the purpose of the merkava is to soften the animal soul.
I gave a whole example. Imagine, you see a very wild animal, and then you bring its mother there. What happens? Often the animal will become tamed because it sees its mother. So when you're invoking the root of the animal soul, that's what I just explained for the last 45 minutes. But last 50 minutes especially. So,
okay.
Were you here during the class?
Yes, I heard that.
So the animal soul doesn't come from nowhere. It's created and evolves from the Pnei Nesher and the Pnei, like he says. So when you bring and invoke those malachim and you say the prayer with kavanah and the proper intention, you're basically in essentially weakening, or more than that, touching, deeply touching, and the root, the very core, hazazat pnimis of the animal soul. It's understanding like I said, the animal soul's purpose is not to be an animal; it's to test us, it's to challenge us. So the more you can come to realize the deeper purpose of it, the more it helps. Yeah.
What level is the merkava? It's in a Asiya, but it sounds like it's also all of the.
There's a merkava in every level. There's a merkava in Bria, there's a merkava tata in Yitzir, there's a merkava in Asiya. It's like saying angels. They're malachim in Bria, malachim in Yitzir, malachim in Asiya. Here, he clearly is saying noiga of Asiya, malachim of Asiya, merkava of Asiya. So clearly he's talking here because he wants to talk as close as possible to us down here in Tachtenim. To jump to merkava of Bria, he's bringing down the merkava as it comes, as I said, it's stepping stones. Every level of the merkava elevates us to the next level. Okay.
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful. Not to get sidetracked, we can do it offline if necessary. What is the highest root of the merkava? Like what gives rise to the merkava?
That's like saying what gives rise to Bria. It's the next step in the process. I mean, like the 10 spheres of Atzilus, they're channeled through Malchus of Atzilus, through the Parsa, the partition, and what it will be called the world of Bria. Bria has Keser of Bria, has Chochma Bina of Bria, has Kodesh Kodashim of Bria, has Nefesh Ruach Neshama of Bria. I mean, it's a whole dynamic. As the energy flows, the next step is merkava. Remember, a merkava is a chariot. It's like the kisei. Elam HaKisei is like a throne where the Adam Elyon of Atzilus sits on, or Malchus sits on. Same thing, merkava is a chariot for the Melech. Chariot means God has ambassadors, if you wish, the malachim, that carry him, so to speak, help the divine energy travel, and that's what emerges. There's even, I think, a merkava in Atzilus sometimes it refers to. When you say Ovis Heinen and merkava, so there's the merkava as they are in Atzilus and the merkava as they are in Bria. Merkava simply means a chariot that's bottle to the divine energy that it flows through. It's a bittel. Merkava is a bittel. The first expression is Ovis Heinen and merkava. Means that it's all it is a channeler or a carrier of the energy that flows through it.
So in other words, it's essentially a reference to the flow of God, the energy of Elikus, down through the Seder Ishtalshalos. Is that another?
Or to put it, that's what malachim are.
Yeah, I was just getting there. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to integrate that into the rest of Seder Ishtalshalos. I do have to say, on the recording, that was the most phenomenal summary of the Seder Ishtalshalos that I've ever heard, and I would say you also summarized a large portion of 1,400 pages of Ayin Beis. Obviously, not every detail because it did in less than an hour, but myself and others in the class today were blown away, and I'm going to encourage everybody in Sekip to try hard to listen to this. That was very special, and clearly you spent a lot of time integrating what's going on here in this parak with the rest of the Ayin Beis and all of Chassidus. Wow, that was just very special. So thank you for taking the time. I mean, that was really mind-blowing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually reading Birchas Yetzer right now. I wanted to see the exact language. So there's the two brachas, Yetzer Eru Beirach Cheshach. That's the first, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Yetzer Eru Beirach Cheshach, Eser Shalom Beirach Hakel. And then within that, he starts talking about the Malachim, where he says, Yetzer Misharsim V'Ashem Misharsav. So he calls the Malachim ministering angels. Kulam Eimdim B'Reim Elum Mashmim B'Yir. I think if you haven't davened yet, or tomorrow, Shachris, read Birchas Yetzer slowly. I'm giving you an exercise, suggested exercise. Read the two brachas right before Krishma. I think it'll come alive in unbelievable ways. As I read it right now, you see what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. He doesn't really bring all the expressions in the tefillah, but when you read it, you see mamish. Like, why are we talking about the angels and they're praising God? And if you look at it, he says, Kulam psuchim b'piyam b'kedusha b'tara b'shira b'zimra b'varchim b'shapchim b'farim. Literally details of how the angels are praising God. And then he goes on to say, I'm reading it. Hagdish liyetzim b'nachas ruach b'safa brura. Kulam einim be'emim eiri yira kodesh kodesh kodesh. Efanim v'chayis hakedesh b'ras gadol. L'umas hasrafim. Right there, the three levels of the angels. L'umas ha'meshapkim be'emim. Okay, continues. And then you finish, Baruch Atah Hashem, Yetzer Ameir. That's Yetzer. Then comes the second, is Avas Elam, which is the last, right before Shema. I think I would check that out. I think it'll help tremendously. The bottom line is that when we can inspire ourselves by, it's like, think of it this way. If you're not inspired, for whatever reason, and you suddenly have yourself, you hire a symphony to come play divine music, beautiful, beautiful music. What will happen? It's going to touch you very deeply. And it could awaken in your own yearnings and longings to godliness. The malachim are that, let's call it cosmic symphony. Now that we know that Nefesh Abamis is rooted there, so if you sing those songs, the praises of the malachim with all the details in Birchas Yetzer, which is really tremendous. Look at the language; you'll see it's very poetic and very powerful. And if you really say it properly, it can have a tremendous emotional impact, not just on your divine soul, on the animal soul, because the animal soul is rooted there, originates from there. That's essentially what he's saying, and just put it in so-called some. So, yeah. So now we have to daven with what we just learned, basically. Okay.
Yeah, could I ask a question? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Go ahead.
First of all, in Yotzer, Barachas Yotzer, and then the Avos Olam, there's no mention of Malachim. I don't see it. I see where you're talking about the Barachas Yotzer. The second one at Shema at night, Mariv, we don't. There's nothing mentioned about Malachim in the bracha before.
He's talking about Shachris, Birchas Yetzer and Shachris.
I understand. That's what I'm. Question is why isn't this? Why don't we inspire or invoke the help of?
So let me throw it back at you. Why don't you go research it and come back with a good answer to us?
Okay, that's a good answer. The second question I have is, but even in the morning, the Shachris, there's only Yotzer, Barachas Yotzer, right? The second Avos Olam, I don't see anything. I don't see anything about Malachim in that bracha before Shema. So it's really one bracha, unless I'm missing something there.
So the question you're asking is, why does the Rebbe Rashab say that
Exactly. That's all.
Does he mean both or not? So either maybe it is, you have to look at Avos Elam, and let's look a little closer. Maybe it is hinted to. And if not, it could be he's referring to the first bracha, but he's saying in general, there's the two brachas. Because that question is a different one. What does Avos Elam have to do with the Birchas Yetzer? Why does one follow the other?
It's leading to it. After you are inspired from the Malachim, then you could ask for yourself with your inner excitement.
Okay, but then he says Achakach Krishma. So you're saying that Avos Elam is first you talk about Malachim, then you talk about more closer to us, and then you go into Krishma. Possible. Again, I would need to research it more. You could do it as well. You know, what the Rebbe Rashab says, he says. What he doesn't say, we have to look other places or try to figure out. I don't have a quick answer to that.
Maybe it's the Inyan of Yichud, because it's and obviously Yisrael says V'yakal Avinu La'ava Li'ira Shmecha. I don't know.
It's possible, or we have to look what we have to look in the Mefarshim on Tefillah, why the Kanchi Knesset Deilu did this order. He doesn't address it here. I believe it's a Chassidus in other places. But hey, everybody can do their research and you guys can do it and come back with whatever you find. I'll be happy to hear.
Second question is the Malachim, as you're saying, the merkava is a channel and throughout for his energy, divine energy through Hishtalshalis. Where the Malachim are coming from one of those, or is it a separate channel? One of the Chayas or one of the three?
The Malachim are the merkava. Pnei Aryeh, Pnei, that is the merkava.
And which one are they coming from? Of the four faces?
He doesn't go into details. He just says the Malachim are the merkava. That's all. He says Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher, Pnei Shehena Malachim Da'asiyah. Either they go into all of them in category, or they have to break it down. Again, I'm explaining what Ayin Beis says. What it doesn't say here would have to require more research.
Got you. And okay, now it's clear. So it's only one flow. There's not two. There's not the merkava and malachim from a different source.
He says the merkava hein hamalachim da'asiyah. He says those are the malachim of asiyah. He says that is those are the malachim, and it says the same in Eira Teira. I gave a source. Yes. If you really want to know more, I would look at, as I said, Eira Teira Shvuos, bottom of page 183 through the top of 185.
Great. And the other one is that term you used, cosmic symphony. I'm going to dive in with that line. You think of cosmic symphony to invoke and evoke spiritual feelings and you know, calming down the divine.
It's like when you see a good chazan or someone davening ba'avoda that can make your heart melt. Even though you may not be there, but you see someone doing it, it so-called softens your animal soul too, you know.
Beautiful term. Never heard that before. Thank you.
This really brings to life chapter 12 of Tanya, where he talks about the power of tefillah to essentially gird the neshama and the nefesh and the shnei shoftim, and you want the nefesh elokis to prevail over the nefesh behema. That prayer helps fortify that your ability to do that. This seems directly connected. This is sort of the nitty-gritty of that.
It is, but it's interesting you bring that up, because there he's talking for fortifying the divine soul. He doesn't really talk there about Yetzer, what you do to so-called to soften the animal soul. So chapter 12 is primarily, at least, is to give the nefesh elokis more strength to dominate in the battle and essentially subdue, or at least for the time, silence the animal soul. Here, the Yetzer is an additional component. We're actually also attacking, getting the animal soul involved. I think later in Tanya he may speak about that. I have to look. I'm up to chapter 13 now teaching, but it's good that you brought it up, because it is good contrast, good discussion. But it's definitely about what prayer does. But I think later he talks more about how tefillah can affect directly the animal soul as well. I don't think it said in chapter 12 is the animal soul. I recall correctly, my understanding at least. I'm not saying which, as I said, it's important what you bring up. I'm just making that distinction.
Yeah, it's a helpful distinction. Maybe my homework will be to see if I can find where in Tanya he talks about, I don't know, schlepping the nefesh behema along, helping the nefesh behema. Reminding
Yeah,
me
because
of the source.
there he's satisfied. Just get the beit nefesh habema out of the way, basically. Just like subdue it or get put, like just keep it quiet. Not so much about elevating the animal souls. Not so much there that point, but later I think he does speak about it. Okay, great topic. I'm glad I did this review. So we'll stop at the new paragraph, the end of the paragraph rather on page